Arjun, welcome to this debriefing session. Congratulations on a 740. Good quant, good verbal scores.
Thank you, Rajat. Feels good to be here.
Okay. So you said you started your preparation about 3 months back, and you're a final year student at Christ College. So tell me about you're thinking about your GMAT, and then how did you go about doing that?
So again, like I said, the purpose of the GMAT was to sort of get it out of the way. I loved the concept of it being valid for 5 years. And as you know, in India, most of these competitive exams give you one shot once a year. And
Yes.
that's something new to me. So the fact that I could do it now and use the score much later on when it's much more relevant to my profile, it definitely made sense. And again, I started doing my research, sort of identified what the exam is, identified basic structure. And I think the place I really came to hear of eGMAT was through GMAT Club, which is probably the forum you guys are most active on.
We actually are not, but people talk about us, yes.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, in terms of just the number of mentions you get, it's always eGMAT on those debriefs. So I checked you guys out. I looked at the testimonials and debriefs, and I think most of these testimonials said they started off with, say, just the OGs, or is it the official guide, or just another test prep company, and then they moved on to you. So I thought maybe I'd skip a step, start off with eGMAT right from the get. And I think that definitely served me well. My preparation time was relatively short in comparison to a couple of stories I've heard. So yeah, I think the research phase, which was critical to me, started off with just identifying the prep company and reading a lot of the content that you guys put up, which I feel would provide a lot of value. Just,
what
small
kind
things.
Of content?
So I think maybe the articles where you talk about, or maybe it was a video where you talked about ability versus accuracy. That sort of set the stage for me right from the beginning, because most of the competitive exams here, they value accuracy, and GMAT is an adaptive test. So I had actually started off with one of the Scholaranium tests, just to like see where I stand on sentence correction, because everybody said it was really hard. And I'm a native English speaker. I've been a debater all my life. I felt like, oh, this really couldn't be as hard as it seemed for someone like me. And when I saw that, I think 22nd or 25th percentile on that Scholaranium quiz pop up, I was shocked. And I looked at the errors I'd made, and clearly I understood there's a lot of depth to this, and you need structure. So to me, getting
it's
that
very interesting. I mean, over the last, and I started doing these interviews again the last 3 months. And one of the other funny things, which is, so a lot of people have said the same thing. I thought my grammar must have been really good, and I should have done well in sentence correction. And they're very surprised that when they start, they say, "Man, it says I'm really bad." Here's another interesting nugget. We're actually training a couple of native English speakers. So you say you're a native. You're talking about American speakers over here. And they were of the same opinion, and they started at a very similar percentile. So it's not just you, it's about teachers people who've been teaching grammar for the last 20 years.
Oh, wow, all right. That's how...
Because GMAT sentence correction is not about grammar.
It is.
You can be a grammarian and screw things up big time.
True, yeah. So, I mean, yeah, that was the reality check I needed to really take the course seriously. I think the fundamental aspect of just the preparation that helped me out was the structure. I felt
so you did that. You were at that 25th percentile. So how did you think about or plan your preparation?
I'll be honest. So I have taken a couple. I mean, again, I've been used to taking exams all my life. This has really been knowledge. I haven't had a break from these examinations. And unlike, again, many of the people who suggested this, to me, a day-to-day planner does not work. It is something that does not work for me.
Yeah, day-to-day planner was very odd, yes.
So, again, I'd use one of your sort of cookie cutter planners where you just said, 2 hours of sentence correction until you're done with it. And then you move on to critical reasoning. You had a couple of 3-month study plans. And I just sort of based it on that and continued. I mean, I decided to start off with the modules that you guys had.
So which one did you start with?
Sentence correction.
Sentence correction. Okay.
Right.
Okay.
And again, it made sense to me because sentence correction sort of teaches you, and now it does make sense. Initially, obviously, you're sort of lost, but sentence correction, you understand how to really comprehend versus paragraphs, pass through data, etc.
Yeah.
Then you move on to critical reasoning, where you build critical, inference, your assumption, all of those skills. And then once you've got an accumulation of all of that, you start off with reading comprehension, which is a mashup of almost everything.
Yes.
So that was the case with me as well. I felt like, that really benefited me. I believe sentence correction, I almost finished the entire course. Really, it was something that was very comprehensive, and several times I was questioning, is it really going to be this detailed? Are they really going to test me on specific concepts? And that was the case. So I definitely found a lot of value in taking these tests immediately once you're done with the concept, figuring things out. And as soon as I was done with, say, a module, I try my hand at a couple of OG questions, again, through the OG quizzes you guys had.
Through the OG quizzes, okay.
Right. And yeah, I mean, initially I was again ticked off, I understand it's intellectual property. At the end of the day, you have to, open the book, figure things out. But
to get to the question, yes.
To get to the question, yeah, it is a bit of a process, but it definitely pays off. I feel like the OG questions should be my Bible. I've read a lot about how the OG questions are your Bible at the end of the day. That is the official aspect to it. So as far as, would you like me to go on in terms of how I approached verbal in general? Because I started off with verbal and then took on quant a little later.
So I think either way, it's the value is in the details in terms of, hey, I mean, because the principles that you probably followed in sentence correction, you did the same thing in critical reasoning and reading comprehension. So I think, if you describe sentence correction, a lot of that would actually go towards critical reasoning and then reading comprehension too. So you would really solve a few official guide questions in sentence correction.
And so I actually think I had a great set of tools that I used. So you guys would teach me the fundamentals and say, I've gone through all the modules. And to me, mindless practice, I mean, while I would never advocate it, it kind of works to just get me in rhythm. And I use GMAT Club for that. Now, the reason I use GMAT Club and just use their timer or whatever, it was easy, okay? It was on my phone. I could get up in the morning, do a couple of questions on the way to college. And, maybe in the night before I sleep, do another couple of questions. It just worked in terms of keeping me in rhythm, keeping me in touch with those concepts.
But that's like 4 questions only in a day. 4 or 5.
You mean GMAT Club?
Yeah.
No, it really is almost like an unlimited question bank with.
No. What I'm really saying is, if you're doing 2 questions in the morning and 2 in the evening, you're not doing 50 questions a day. You're doing 4 or 5 questions a day.
I didn't mean couple literally. I mean, there's a substantial amount that I do. In fact, some nights I just, before I sleep, I sort of got carried away. I'd spend an hour just doing sentence correction questions, just keep going through, looking at the reasoning behind why I got things wrong. And this is obviously based on what I'd probably learned through the module. What I'm trying to really say here is I was able to sort of hash it out once I'd learned these principles and theories much more on using the GMAT Club app.
So again, let's kind of make sure I understand the sequence. So let's say you were doing the subject verb module. Were you doing GMAT Club questions after that, or after you're done with the SC?
So I had to get done with the entirety of the module first. So I'd finish off the sentence correction module. And once I felt I was ready, I'd expose myself to, you can filter by difficulty there. Yes. So I would have obviously attempted very difficulty levels through the e-GMAT module. I would have obviously taken my pick at a couple of OG questions that I found tough. And then I look at the 700 level questions of GMAT Club. And obviously they're substantially easier than initially when I started, and it worked out much better. So to me, just the frequency of difficult questions that I was able to look at every day really helped. And then when I finally felt prepared, I'd take a Scholaranium quiz and see what happened. So that was really the sequence I'd followed, and it held true for the entirety of the verbal section. Quant, not so much, but for the entirety of the verbal, that was what I'd done.
Okay. And then when you were solving these questions on GMAT Club or either on Scholaranium in SC, did you use the meaning-based approach?
Absolutely. The meaning-based approach, it was conveyed again through the SC module, but there were a lot of seminars that I attended as well, which you guys host on YouTube. So I think that is probably the most fundamental aspect to SC. The minute you're able to identify the real intended meaning, a lot of options sort of start to waver. And to me, the split sort of ideology that quite a few people advocate worked sometimes, and sometimes really was hard to identify what the decision points are to be. So I feel like it was a mixture of a couple of things. There was a real mixed bag when it came to SC. I'd use splits wherever there was like a glaring error, see a big subject verb, right, or like a big modifier error, which again ties into meaning a little. But I felt definitely, even when I gave the test, the meaning-based questions started to pop up really, really hard closer to the end. And that is where I feel like things went well for me.
Okay. And then let's kind of move on to critical reasoning. You probably followed a similar approach over there too.
Absolutely, yes. In fact, so pre-thinking worked really well for me. In fact, so well that I felt like it was ingrained after a point, and it became like second nature. And so I really struggled with critical reasoning. I felt like, initially when you look at, the sort of questions that GMAT asks, you'll try your hand at a few. And this was before I started eGMAT. Yeah. I tried my hand at critical reasoning. I got a couple right, got a couple wrong. Never knew why I was getting things right either. It was not something that came instinctively to me. I did not even really understand the fundamental definitions of an assumption or an inference. So I think I'd really focused on the assumption model you guys had. Maybe the first 3 to 4 aspects of the assumption model gave me enough of a foundation to really get the questions right. And after that, it smooth sailing. So that was the case with critical reasoning. I felt, and again, Mrs. Payal really takes you through the pre-thinking approach every question. So when you hear it again and again, it's really hard not to do it. And it isn't something instinctively that comes to you when you read the question stem. You're not really going to think about what they're really looking for. You would look at the answer choices first. And that was the case for me. I had to break that habit. And once I'd broken it, so the pre-thinking works for me, at least, for a large number of questions. But once it gets really hard, I mean, these are again, GMAT Club come, some of the official questions that got really hard for me. I'd find myself performing a little better when I sort of use the same approach, wherein I'd question, for example, if it was an assumption question, in what scenario does the assumption break, and look at each answer choice and see whether it breaks it. So I'm still asking the question. It's just, I feel like it was a little time consuming to think of a reason during the harder passages. But it was
and I think you have to understand why are those passages harder, and you may have a different definition of harder passages versus someone else, and the reason what makes a passage harder truly, because really when you get to the answer over there, you feel, okay, now I understand. Is if there's a context in the passage or in the argument which you can't visualize completely, then that seems very difficult. So what you're really saying is you truly understood the logic. You really said, if something did X, I don't know how that would be worded. If something did X, that probably would break the conclusion. And that is what I'm looking at. So you looked at the option and said, is it breaking that? Is it breaking that? Is it breaking that? And you kind of narrowed down to the option. And the reason why you were in that situation is because you couldn't visualize it. Whereas for most of the other arguments, the reason you could really say this is a possible way to break it, which is where you could completely visualize. And that's something that happens with everyone. And that happens with me. I mean, there'd probably be 3% or 4% of the questions where I can't visualize the argument, but comprehend the logic.
And understand what it is looking for, right?
And then you go to the answer choices. Because you've comprehended the logic, you can't really kind of say, okay, how in the world can someone build a scenario? But because you can comprehend the logic, once you see a scenario that's been built, you really say this has to be the answer because it's fitting into the logic over there. And and the other piece which is there is, once you get to the right answer, you actually expand your ability to visualize. Why? Because you can then really say, hey, why was I unable to visualize?
Yeah. In fact, I felt very strongly that critical reasoning was testing me on all the right things at one point, because as I'd started to practice more and more questions with the same framework, it was almost automatic. I'd have to just look at the question stem. I'd almost know what is required to break the passage.
Yes.
And I find my answer choice. It was almost like magic after a point. So that critical reasoning never seemed to be that much of an issue for me. And I think, fundamentals really play a big role though.
Yeah, that's something which is, I mean, I'm just looking at your metrics here. and really good data over here when I look at this in critical reasoning. I mean, overall scores, very good scores. 95% concept quizzes, 84% practice quizzes. And the reason why I say 84% is good is because our practice quizzes are hard in critical
Right.
reasoning. They're not. I mean, sentence correction relatively easier. Critical reasoning, it starts to get really hard, even in these concepts here, which truly lay the foundation of any argument-based question. And I mean, again, and evaluate. It's not just the scores; it's also the quality time spent over here. It's really good, and so I think that for me is indication that you caught critical reasoning very well. And because when I see people who get in that, you have 94th percentile on verbal, people who get into that 94th percentile, they have such good stats. I think I'm locked out of your account because someone else is using it probably, or someone else is using my account to log in as. But essentially same thing in sentence correction. Good stats overall. Anything upwards of 80% here we consider good stats, and especially look at the practice quizzes over here. And then for sentence correction, I like to go into modifiers, and I look at the application file scores and the practice file scores over here. So, or a better way to do that is so to just filter them out over here. So good scores here as well. And clearly, I mean, depending on what your strength and weaknesses are, you can see the varied amount of time spent. For example, someone who's weaker in sentence correction but still gets to the same ability as you have gotten to, I more often than not see about 30-35 minutes over here. Similar scores, but after 35 minutes. Okay, but for you, I see that part more in critical reasoning than in sentence correction. And that's kind of the beauty of that personalization, where you, if you're a student who's accustomed to learning things, where you can yourself modulate that learning to really say, hey, I know I need to go slightly slower over here.
Right. Definitely. And critical reasoning, you guys had some really interesting application quizzes with questions I probably didn't see anywhere. And like GMAT Club has almost every test set of companies, almost every set of official questions. And some of these application quizzes really stumped. So it gave me a good basis to sort of go on. And I didn't really have to come back to it once I'd figured that out.
Yeah, once it's a part of your this thing, because there aren't a lot of concepts here.
Right. It is really instinctive.
Application.
Yeah, intuitive as well. Yeah. Yes. Right. So that was the way I approached it. And once I was done with sentence correction and critical reasoning, I took the decision to not really touch reading comprehension instantly. And the reason behind that was, it was partly motivated by fear, because I saw that I was spending, and again, during the time of your preparation, you have no idea how quant is going to be, how verbal is going to be. You're really seeing and understanding the depths of each section, and you realize that different sections could be extremely tough or extremely easy for you. So I really needed to get my hand on quant and just start that rhythm again, like I told you, because to me that was critical. Just every day being in touch with those concepts, so it's not foreign to me again. So I kept reading comprehension on hold for a bit, and I started with quant, and it was a mix. I used a lot of eGMAT courses, and where I probably did poorer than I thought I would. With number properties was a bit of a pain area for me to start with, while word problems were substantially better. And it was a combination of that, the OGs and GMAT Club. So like I said, I'd follow a similar sequence. I'd start off with the module, especially in geometry, where it wasn't something that came as naturally to me. And then I'd move on to say, look at the official guide quizzes, look at the questions you guys have highlighted, maybe solve. And I felt in quant, solving the official guides as on the whole sort of helps, because you're really mixing all these question types together. And the reason I felt that was because, say, I'd perform really well on an algebra quiz, on algebra Scholaranium, and then I went on to just get exposed to just a bunch of different concepts. Suddenly, it sort of threw me off my game a little. And just being ready to suddenly face a probability, a permutation combination, and then move back to number properties. Just getting in that set was a bit of a rough time initially, but I think that as well. Yeah.
Okay, good. So that's good. So then how much time did you spend on verbal versus quant in your preparation?
So verbal did occupy more in terms of prep time. I started around mid-August, and by when I finished off the first two modules of verbal and started quant by mid-October. So that was really my prep time. Mid-October and November was largely quant with supplementing with verbal, and verbal was the August, September-ish timeline.
Okay.
So 1.5 months even.
1.5 month each. So
yeah, so that would have been my split for both of these sections.
Okay, and then did you also what shall I say? What kind of mock tests did you take?
So the only mock tests I elected to take were the GMAT Prep official mocks. And
yes.
the reason behind that was, again, I had a bit of a shock when I took my first mock, and it was a very solid score. It was a 770. And again, I will tell you my reasoning behind why I understand I scored really highly in that. So it was a Q49, V47. And to me, that was obviously much more than I'd imagined. This was actually the first mock I'd taken. I'd only taken Scholaranium quizzes so far. So for me to see that score, and again, the reason I would advise, again, anybody watching to not take the GMAT Prep mocks, at least the first two seriously, would be because you may have come across several of these questions before.
Because especially if you're practicing on GMAT Club.
Exactly. So initially I was shocked, and it didn't feel like I'd mastered all of these concepts particularly. So I did not see how the 770 came about, and that slowly started to unravel as I took the next couple of mocks. So I think I was a little inconsistent. I had gotten a 770. Probably the second mock that I took was around a 740 to a 750, and it remained around that area, with the verbal score sort of hovering around V41 to V44 in that range. And so the GMAT official mocks were the only mocks I took, because once I'd seen that second 750, I decided that I didn't want to get out of rhythm. I had to take it soon. And that is when I decided to book my test date. I hadn't booked a date so far. So the minute I saw the second mock was hovering around 750, I said, the time is now, and looked at what dates are available. And the next couple, so I bought the pack as well, in terms of they offer a pack of 2. So I bought both those packs.
3 and 4. All 4 of them.
So I bought both the packs. So that's all 4, and I finished about 5 of those mocks. I still have 1 that has been unused.
Okay.
So that was my mock test experience, right?
Okay, good. That's good. I mean, again, had you taken our mocks, you would have gotten very.
I would have had, right. And that was fully the intention. But when I saw the score, I felt like the only goal right now for me was to maintain it. That was the ideology when I
so you were happy with that.
Initially, yes, that was the case. Now, obviously, I realized that things.
Yeah, because you would have. So our mocks give you the same reports that ESR gives you.
Right.
You would have exactly known where to focus your energy on.
Right. Again, this was at the end of around. It was at the end of a 2.5 month period, and I feel maybe I may have jumped the gun a little bit in terms of seeing score, getting a little too excited, immediately booking.
That's okay. That is a great score.
But yeah, so that really is the story. Yeah.
Okay. So and I can actually now stop recording.